So I want to welcome everybody to Coming to the Center. If you've stumbled in and not sure where you are, this is a each semester live stream presented by Cherry Hill Seminary, and most often sponsored by our alumni group, Votaries. I'll say more about them in a minute. And we're just delighted to have here today Professor Graham Harvey of England, who will share about his past research and current research interests, which include animism, indigenous people, and some of the responses to the rise of neo-fascism in recent years. I want to invite Wes Isley to turn on your mic for a minute and just say something real briefly about the Votaries alumni group, because this is a special time for you guys.
Thanks, Holly. For those of you who don't know me, who I haven't met yet, my name is Wes Isley. I'm a 2019 MDiv graduate of Cherry Hill and current chair of our Votaries Alumni Circle. And so on behalf of our members, I'd like to welcome Dr. Harvey today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I read his book on animism a little while ago and found that very insightful. So I'm looking forward to what he brings us this afternoon.
Thanks.
And one thing that Votaries does as a group is we sponsor events like this that support Cherry Hill's mission of supporting pagan and nature spiritualities education. And in particular, I want to thank a couple of our members who've helped make this possible today. First would be Alexandra Balmer, then Dana Dirksen, Gordon Green, Jeffrey Kiefer, Carol Kirk, Polly Springhorn, and Kirk Thomas. So if they're here today, thank you very much. And Holly, if it's okay, I thought I'd go ahead and just post a Votaries link in the chat group in case anyone's interested in learning more about what all we do and how you can join.
Great idea, thank you. And it's your second anniversary?
Yes, our second anniversary. We've been privileged to do some things with Cherry Hill, such as starting a Professor of the Year award. We've had 2 of those already, and we'll soon be taking nominations for our next award for the 2022-23 academic year. So stay tuned for that. And I'll post that link and I'll turn it back to you, Holly.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me tell you just a little bit about Dr. Harvey. He is a professor at the, scroll back up, make sure I get this right, at the Open University, that's still current, right?
Yeah.
And has his PhD in, well, you're a professor of religious studies. I'll let you say more if you'd like to about your specific PhD. And you were brought up relatively near Stonehenge and participated in that festival in the 70s, and have just been all around involved in the pagan community. Many of us have used your Contemporary Paganism book in our Cherry Hill courses, and we've especially found your book Animism, Respecting the Living World, to be very useful at this particular time, especially as we go through being endangered climate-wise. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Graham Harvey and invite you to just open up with a little bit about what you feel is your the base of your work.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a great honour to be invited to join you this evening or this afternoon there, I guess. Well, I'm 5 hours ahead of you, and it's raining here. So if you want rain, maybe it'll turn up, head that way as well. I'll just briefly mention my PhD because you mentioned it, Holly, although I don't think it's particularly useful for our conversation, because it's about the use of 3 words in ancient Jewish and early Christian texts. And it does kind of illustrate my obsession with the use of words and the way that words can be used in multiple ways, and we have to think carefully about word choices, which is easier done in writing than it is talking. So I might use the wrong words this evening in the flow of things, but so I did my PhD near here in the northeast of England, in Northumberland, specifically the University of Newcastle on Tyne. Finished that in '91, and I would never have got a job if it wasn't for the fact that I bumped into lots of pagans. First of all, at Stonehenge, because I used to skip school and go to the festival when it was a kind of big hippie event, and I was a young hippie. Hard to believe, I know. So the department I was in, they started a new course, or they were going to start a new course on contemporary religions. And I jokingly said I'd do a session about the Druids, because I'd vaguely seen them at Stonehenge, although I was really there for the music and the conversation, not at all for the solstice or the drugs, honestly. They took me seriously and said, yes, nobody else is doing this stuff about Druids and pagans. So I hitchhiked back down to Wiltshire, where I'd been brought up, and I found these people, and my career took off because I found a new way of doing research, new to me, that is, hanging out with people and chatting, and then trying to convey some of what they were doing, what was important to them, to other people. And there were a few people doing pagan studies back then, some very important people, but not very many of us. So things took off fairly quickly. So it's kind of, serendipitous event for me. And then my career's evolved in the same kind of way by, I was interested, I went to a conference in Newfoundland, which happened to be hosted on the Mi'kmaq First Nation Reserve, Mi'kmaq Reserve, on the Con River. But I was presenting about neo-shamans and pagans and healing ideas. But I'd always been interested in Indigenous people and their religious traditions. And I'd met some people before, but this was a very key moment for me. At the end of the conference, the Mi'kmaq Reserve put on a powwow, their first traditional powwow, which probably means not competitive, rather than that they'd ever done it before. So tradition's an interesting word. And the powwow went on for 3 days, and at the very end of the powwow, the very last honour song, as the drum group were playing the last honour song, the veterans and elders were doing the last dance around the drum group, the largest of the eagles from across the river flew over the river, flew a perfect circle around the drum group harbour, and then went back to its eyrie on the other side. And everybody, including the locals, said, Kitpu, eagle, or whatever language they were speaking. And for the next day or more, people were talking to each other about, did you see that eagle? Did you see what it did? The eagle was saying, welcome back. We've kept the traditions going. Now you humans are back doing it again. It's about time. Get on with it. And words to that effect. So it was I'd encountered similar things among pagans. You know, we all know how in the middle of some ceremony, something will happen, a wind will get up, or a bird will come to the circle, or something significant will happen that the larger than human world will join in good ceremony anyway. And but that eagle's flight provoked me to try and do some research again, kind of hanging out with different indigenous people in different places to find out what it meant to them to do tradition today, not in any precious pre-Columbian kind of version, but how does it make sense to honor the ancestors and the land and so on and so on in this world today. So again, I shifted my kind of focus of research towards contemporary indigenous religions, and particularly what we're now calling animism, in a very different way to what the word was used for, say, 20 years ago. So whilst I still spend time with pagans with great pleasure, sometimes, mostly, I'm not actively doing research among many pagan groups. I kind of, every now and again, I do little bits writing about some of the people that I spend time with, but I've supervised PhD students and I've included pagan studies in my teaching material and so on. So sorry, that was probably a rather long introduction. Is that?
No, that was fine. It made me think about how I was struck that a lot of your work really sounds, I mean, it's like it began to be more of an anthropology point of view. And, you know, I'm sure there are people here who may not be aware of the distinction between animism as it was as that word was used for a long time and our current use. Would you care to say anything about that?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with the way we use it now. Let's start with the positive, because otherwise we get bogged down with the negative, but I'll tell you what it used to be. So my kind of rather long car bumper sticker for animism is something like, animism is the practice of treating the world around us as a community of living persons or living beings, most of whom are not human, but all of whom deserve respect. So then I have to expand it to say animism isn't one thing. There are lots of local versions because we live in particular places, particular communities, larger than human communities. So there are, I mean, badgers or hedgehogs or fish or trees of different kinds and so on. And there are local ways of showing respect that derive from different ancestral traditions. So communities that have inherited an animistic tradition have ways in which they learn by practice how to show respect, and they differ from place to place. And others, like myself, living in northern England now, we don't really have major ways of showing respect to the rest of the world, sadly. So we're learning, and then so we may come back to that discussion about how do you learn from other people. But just to finish that little theme about showing respect. So among many Native Americans, not all, to show respect, you would offer tobacco or kinnikinnick or some other plant substance to either respected elder humans or respected trees, rocks, eagles, bison, whoever. Note the pronoun whoever. But in West Africa, you would pour beer for your ancestors, you would offer beer to your elders, and so on. So you wouldn't do those two things don't cross. Beer isn't a particularly respectful thing to offer in many indigenous communities in North America, traditionally. So local ways of showing respect are important. So animism is about that kind of learning, and there are other versions of the use of the word. one of which suggests that animism is a childish mistake, and children are naturally animistic, you know, naughty table hurt me kind of thing. And then we all, parents and grandparents, say, you know, naughty table, don't do it again. And then the child is encouraged to grow up and realize that tables don't attack people, allegedly. So we kind of move on. But in indigenous communities, often what I found is that it's the elders who are more animistic than the children, precisely because the elders have learnt how to show respect, how to engage, or to start a conversation, or to be present enough to say, I would like to have a conversation. I'd like to have a vision from the eagles or the bison or the caribou or this tree or these mushrooms or whatever. So I will sit patiently, and when you're ready, I'm listening. You know, whereas children tend to rush around. So yeah, so there's lots of things, a lot of indigenous people talking about how children slowly catch the kind of what it means to act animistically or respectfully in the larger community, the larger world. But then there's another version of animism that the early anthropologists, Edward Tyler was the first professor of anthropology at Oxford University. When he used the word animism, he used it to encapsulate what he meant, what he understood about all religions, right? So, and for him, animism was again a primitive mistake in which people thought that the rest of the world were like humans in some way. So humans communicate, humans have dreams in which maybe your great-grandparents who have died meet you, and you treat that dream as a real communication. So you believe in spirits. So Edward Tyler's animism is one word for all of religion. His slightly longer version was religion is belief in spirits, and he meant by that all religions, and he included in that, remember this is Oxford in the 1880s and so on. The Church of England too, people believed in spirits, but they meant God, the saints, and so on. And Edward Tyler thought that the modern scientific world, people would grow out of this animistic mistake, and science would teach them that dreams are just, you know, you've eaten cheese too late at night, or those kinds of things. So it's like the naughty table hurt me. It's a silly mistake, and we will grow out of it, not just as children becoming adults, but as a culture becoming adult. And that idea about people, animists, kind of stuck, but mostly got applied to indigenous people rather than all the other religions. So then we get into a whole colonial thing about some religions get treated as major religions or world religions. These are the terrible phrases that we ought to abandon now. And only indigenous people were accused of being animists in that sense. But in the 1990s, a number of people, some anthropologists, some others, gained a lot more respect from learning among indigenous people, and most importantly, indigenous scholars and indigenous teachers began to be much more bold in saying, look, we know the world, we've experimented with different ways of engaging with the world. This is the way it is. It is a community. It is a communicative world. And if you learn to listen, and you may find the right ways to have conversations with rocks or plants or other beings. And even if you don't know how to listen or to actually hear the words, in whatever language, you still should sit quietly, you should still show respect, you should still give gifts, and then maybe you'll receive a gift. So all of this kind of new respectful approach and more bold approach has really influenced a lot of people in many disciplines, and it's escaped from kind of anthropology and ethnographic disciplines. So there are people doing hard sciences, botanists and others. I mean, especially indigenous scholars like Robin Kimmerer and others, who are at the forefront of saying, okay, this is the way the world is, and the rest of us need to learn new ways to talk about it. So animism is that kind of thing. I'm quite happy to go on and on about it.
There's a lot to go on about. You're commenting on the children interested me because I'm doing a sermon at a UU congregation in a few weeks, and I've given them the title Thinking Like a Mountain. And I love that idea that the mountain outdates all of us. But I also was asked about a children's story. And I kept thinking about Val Plumwood.
Yeah.
And if anybody is not aware of that, she was attacked by a crocodile in 1985. And it's just a miracle that it's amazing that she's still alive. It's unheard of. And she would not let the park rangers go back and kill the crocodile. But that's, she writes about how we're all food for somebody else. And I thought, how do you talk to children about that? But anyway, does any of that stir you?
No, Val Plumwood's, so the article, for those of you who don't know, Val Plumwood's article about that is called Being Prey. So you can Google it, and you can find various versions of it. I've reprinted it elsewhere too. It's a great lesson in, what happened and her response afterwards. And basically it made her the eco-feminist environmentalist that she became. Sadly, she died a few years ago, but lived her life in this profoundly respectful way, trying to make sure that the bit of land that she, in inverted commas, owned, was owned in fact by this larger than human community. And so, in response to the crocodile thing, she said, having survived this crocodile's attack 3 times, the crocodile was doing what crocodiles should do, and other beings. It was policing that place that she should not have been in, and she hadn't gained permission to be there. And the crocodile was being the police. So I think we have a lot to learn about not only that we are prey to some other creatures, but also that we are not the pinnacle of the food chain, and we should be thinking about how to be respectful of those who we do eat, and finding ways to give back, not just expressions of gratitude, but healthier ways of engaging with the larger world. So that's a big challenge. Obviously, for all of us living in this consumerist world, bombarded with adverts all the time, it's very difficult to be completely self-sufficient, let alone to live in a piece of land where you can allow the rest of the world to get on doing its thing, with you as just one small member of that community. So that's been a big interest of mine, is to see different communities in different places trying to find ways to do this, and like as people in Extinction Rebellion say, and as Lord of the Rings fans say, every journey begins with one step. So you have to begin somewhere. Let's begin where we are, and let's make the first couple of steps, and that's already a change. But but clearly we need to do some more dramatic, fast journeys as well. So,
Yeah, would you say a little bit more about Leopold's mountain example? Because
yeah,
I like the way you wrote about that.
okay. Yeah, so there's, yeah, so there's that whole, yeah, thinking like a mountain. Sorry, my mind's gone into a thing about other people picking up that phrase, and
I did.
rather than themselves trying to think like a mountain, they kind of do this, I will represent the mountain. So it's still like becoming, they're not really, what's the right phrase for this? So you could be a diplomat, let's put it that way. You could, if you were a diplomat, and you learned the language and the culture of a mountain or another human community or whatever, it would take you a while to learn that, and then you'd come back to your community and you would try and convey what's important to those people. So what's important to a mountain? So the mountain perhaps wants to be left alone. It lives at a much slower pace than we do, or any of the other beings, the trees or the eagles that live up the mountain. But it also, the mountain is giving all the time. It gives airflows. It gives land for the trees to a certain height to produce oxygen and so on. So it's continuously gifting, but it's also expecting some sort of respect. But the challenge to me is the people who do this too fast. And it's not just mountains, but other beings too. And they kind of, let's put on a mask like an eagle or a bear or something, and then I'm going to tell you what bears want. And you go, how do you know that? I mean, have you really learned by the science stuff, the botany stuff, or are you in a fantasy world where you think because you can dance a bit like a bear, you can then convey it? So sorry,
Yeah, that's good.
I've gone off in rather odd direction there. So I think for Leopold, it was that kind of the mountains need to be respected for themselves and given their space and their time, and not treated as a human resource, and certainly not treated as inert mere scenery, or even a place to go to for recreation or recreation, for the restoration. There's a lot of stuff during these last couple of COVID years of people going out into nature. And I understand what we all mean by that, because our culture teaches us that nature is out there beyond the human town.
That seems like an important point to make.
Okay, yeah. So this is, I'm afraid, this might lead me to rant a bit even further.
Please.
So yeah, I mean, so in the pagan kind of revival, the phrase, this is a nature religion, is one that we're all familiar with, we pagans. And again, I understand what it meant, that it was in the early to mid 20th century. People were worried about industrialization still going on and all the kind of extractivism that was building up still. And especially because a lot of them were in Britain, our idea of nature is out there outside the city, and it's particularly places like our Lake District in England or the Scottish Highlands, which appear to be wild nature. So the fact is that they are devastated, degraded land, and have been for thousands of years. They're almost monocultures. But even if I was to move my laptop to show you the fields around me, I live out in a small village of about 100 people near the River South Tyne. So it looks lovely. There's a bit of wood, there's a river, there's hills. I live 3 miles south of Hadrian's Wall. It's an ex-industrial landscape, so you no longer see the coal mine and so on, or the quarry. There's a quarry half a mile up the hill from me where, so this is just a fun aside, a rather bizarre aside, the stone from this hill was taken to build not only parts of Newcastle, the nearest big city, and bits of Edinburgh, not too far away, but also at least one building in Hawaii. I mean, like, what kind of world do we live in where stone is taken from here? It's just sandstone. I mean, what's going on? Anyway, so our English version of nature is these places outside of cities, or even outside of towns. And I'm afraid I've been ranting quite a bit recently about it's not just that we are part of nature, but that nature doesn't stop anywhere. It's, all of us, I've had to shut my curtains because of the light here, and I can see at least one of you Wes has got a blind down. So nature is, there's light, there's air flowing. It's too hot or too cold or too wet. We put on clothes, that's nature. Humans are no way separate from it, but also, you are already, that idea of reconnected with nature, you can't get any more connected than you already are. Inside your guts and your blood system, there are more non-human cells than human ones. The DNA, if you were to put yourself into a liquidizer and extract the DNA, there's more non-human stuff than there is human. Maybe smaller, but it's all these bacteria, gut bacteria who break down the food, make all the nutrients available. My favorite one, and I apologize to those of you that heard me do this before, but this is a bit of audience participation. So if you've got a long sleeve, this is the point you have to roll it up. Right, and I expect you all to be doing this right now, right? So bare your inner elbow and stroke your inner elbow, all right? Just pause, you are now in touch with 5 tribes of bacteria. That's their preferred real estate. They don't think that they're living on a human. They just think that's the place to be. And they've evolved with humans, and we wouldn't have evolved the way we have were it not for these particular bacteria and the ones inside our guts and elsewhere. So you can't escape from being connected with this large and human community. You don't need to go anywhere. So that's the first big lesson. The second lesson, of course, is that it's still important that we do go out, because we can't just protect the bacteria on our elbow crook. We need to worry about the trees that are threatened around here. We've got ash dieback. We probably won't have ash trees in a few years' time. The salmon in this river are returning because the river's cleaner, but they're endangered by the water flow and so on, because of climate change. So we do need to go out into the world, but we shouldn't call it nature as if that was something different to human culture and so on. So if there's anything to take away from this apart from you will remember the elbow bacteria, I promise you.
I will.
but also don't use the word nature ever again, right? That's nothing else I say tonight is more important than that. Think of other ways of talking about the world rather than nature, right?
How can you, you're a professor of religious studies and we're a seminary. So I think it's appropriate for us to not just go at this from a cognitive, shall we say, point of view, but how would you encourage people to sensitize themselves and to live with an animistic outlook?
Okay, so right, so I'm in a slightly difficult position now because you introduced that as a professor of religious studies. As a professor of religious studies, I shouldn't be preaching at you. I should be, standing back, observing these interesting and strange and wonderful things happening, and write objectively. But I don't, obviously. So on the other hand, my ranting, my sermonizing goes a bit further than this kind of dialogue and so on. So if I carry on with that theme of okay, one of the other big things that happened when Gerald Gardner and Ross Nichols together created two new kinds of paganism, Wicca and Druidry, of the new kind, the new becoming pagan kinds. One of the things that they did, which is quite remarkable, is that they made ritual the center of the thing, because again, they were British, and we've had 500 years of burning Catholics because they do ritual. I mean, I exaggerate, but ritual was the problem for European Protestants, and we stopped doing ritual or thinking about being respectful of ritual as a way of engaging with the world or a way of doing religion. Religion became about belief and about preaching and cognitive stuff. So to choose, okay, they wrote books and they talked a lot, but actually what was important was creating these ritual cycles, the 8 festivals that nobody had celebrated as a complete one cycle before. They'd done all the bits of them, but not that as a package. And in a particular way that they adapted earlier ritual complexes to make this new way of being pagan is quite radical. And the fact that we've carried it on so that the thing we're doing now, me talking at you, isn't the most typically pagan kind of activity. The more typically pagan activity is when we get out into the larger world and we get in a circle or whatever it is, whatever shape of ceremony you do, and we do ceremony. We greet other beings around us. I mean, however you conceive of them, whether you think they're deities or watchtowers or the elements, or whether you actually talk to the badgers and the hedgehogs and the salmon or whatever, and you get visited by some bird in the middle of the ceremony, whatever. When we do ceremony, things happen. The rest of the world, like that eagle at Con River, and I'm sure you've had similar experiences, because I know enough pagans who have had similar experiences. Things happen. The rest of the world goes, oh, they're doing it again. We know these people. Let's go and just say, well done. We'll join in the singing or something. So that to me, we just need to carry on, and we just need to do more of it, and we need to infect the rest of the world. So it may be that to learn to do ritual, we have to learn this kind of the local etiquette, and that might mean sitting quietly by the river or on the hill or on the mountain, learning what that place community wants, being aware that there are places that don't welcome us or as humans, and that introducing ourselves in some way. So there are lots of local ways of doing that, and lots of indigenous communities have particular styles of introduction. So to me, as a visitor in various, and hopefully at least a willing guest, somebody who wants to be a guest in indigenous communities, I want to know what I could possibly do as a respectful visitor to that larger community. So as well as wanting to be respectful of the human community, I do ask people if there's something that I can learn without being an appropriating another old white bearded man again. What can I do? And some of those things I think are totally appropriate anywhere, because they do involve sitting quietly, and they're like like indigenous people with their children. You kind of, you pick it up. And in most communities, people don't spend a lot of time explaining. I mean, the worst thing you can do in ritual is explain it all beforehand and then debrief afterwards. You just have to catch it. So the whole idea that that someone's going to sit you down and explain everything first, you need to just join in quietly, find your role, and then see what catches. So that's been my experience, both as a researcher, wanting to understand, say, both in North America among Anishinaabe people and Mi'kmaq people, whose language says rocks are animate beings, persons, but also in Alice Springs in Central Australian desert, where I got told these rocks are a dingo, and these rocks, this ridge, they're caterpillars, not they represent a caterpillar or they symbolize it, or this story is about a caterpillar, and we can imagine this is a caterpillar, this is a dingo, this rock is an ancestor, and so on. So trying to learn what it means as a scholar, but also somebody who has over these years kind of got the idea that actually these people who've been doing this stuff in Australia for 50,000 years and more, they do understand their world. So it's just ridiculous for me if I went in and thought, well, I'm an expert and I know rocks are just sediment of ancient seas, and they're not animate, they're just, so what kind of practice? And basically you don't get to learn how you engage with those caterpillars unless you were born or perhaps even conceived there. So all you get told as a visitor, as a guest, if you're lucky, is what children would be told. And then if you stay long enough, you learn more and so on. But you have no right to learn all of the things that elders born or conceived in that place know. And therefore, that's another thing I think is very important, that as a scholar of the new kind, there are things I cannot know. So I can tell you there are things I don't know and I cannot know. There are ceremonies I cannot be involved in. And that's good enough. There are Anishinaabe stories that are only told when there's ice on the lakes. And so I couldn't possibly tell you even the little bits of those stories that I do know, because there is no ice on the lake at the moment. So to be respectful of those traditions, as a scholar, let alone as an animist, I have this kind of interesting kind of tension. Sorry.
What about urban dwellers, or those who may not be aware of a particular tradition and where they are? People who are incarcerated, people who are institutionalized, say in a nursing home.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's always the elbow bacteria. There's always, the air comes through. There's stuff happening. I mean, yes. So it is a bigger challenge. They can't just get up and go for a walk down to the river like I can and sit quietly. But we are members of this planet. We are members of a community, even if we've been ostracized by our human community or by other beings around us. So I think some sort of meditative practice where you kind of at least express to whoever's around, the cosmos, the invisible beings around us, that you are wanting to be in better relationships. So I think those things are possible in those contexts. And yeah, I'm very bad at the bit of paganism, bit of indigenous traditions of animism, and in fact of any other religious tradition, which deals with invisible beings, because they've had too much attention as far as I'm concerned. So it's very easy to start talking about animism or paganism, and people start talking about gods and goddesses, about spirits and other beings that most people don't see all the time. Even we don't see all the time. And I have no trouble understanding and making gift offerings and trying to sit quietly and learning, and no trouble knowing that sometimes some of those beings are very evidently around. So I'm not denying their presence. I'm not rejecting any of those ideas or practices. But the thing that, okay, so if the most creative thing that Joe Regard and Ross Nichols and others, sorry, I just use them as if they were all on their own.
Sure.
I know there are lots of people around creating those paganisms. So I've already said the most creative thing they did was to make ritual the central thing, but they still lived in a very Protestant country. So they still treated humans as separate beings, and they still treated religion as some engagement with these more transcendent beings. So they got a still heavier emphasis on goddess, god, plural, goddesses and gods, spirits of various kinds, elements of various kinds, and so on. And it's taken a while for many of us to get to the more diversely ecological paganisms in which hedgehogs and badgers and other beings, but also in which we relearn what some of those other world beings are like in our older traditions. So some of you may be Terry Pratchett fans. So lords and ladies, there are lots of these euphemistic phrases where you do not name the beings around us, the other world beings. So I'll use it once, the word fairy. Don't say it again, because that might just encourage them to come and visit. And they're not nice. I mean, they're not cute little flower beings. They're not even little people. We can call them little people because they're not little. They all those good old traditions that we had, they turn up and they steal brides or grooms. They take your baby away and they put some horrible squalling creature in its cot, right? Where's all that tradition gone? So when you next invoke those beings, be very careful, because you might just get those beings turning up. And I got the same response again back in Newfoundland. The next time I went to the Com River, I was talking to a guy leading some sweat lodges during the powwow they were doing that year. And he walked the edge of this promontory by the Con River, and he talked across the river to this crag, which is where some of the big eagles live. But he was talking to the little people over there. And I said, I didn't know there were little people here too. And he said, yes, but we've now mentioned them too many times, and that's it. I'm not talking about them ever again. And he just walked away, and I went, okay. So again, I know no more than that there are these beings, and I don't know if in that context they're little or big, who they are. But so I've read and I've talked to other Indigenous people about little people, and understand that there are little people in different places. Some of them might be little, some of them definitely aren't. So I think, the kind of the way that we those relationships. So I'm just going to come back to your question about people in care homes or secure environments. Maybe those other beings not the tricksy ones, hopefully, because they've probably got enough trouble. But some of the other more health-giving beings might make their presence known better in those contexts. You have to hope. So,
Yes, okay, thank you.
okay.
I'd like to shift a little bit because it occurs to me that your research with Indigenous people and the Sami in particular, and the Reassembling Democracy project and all of that, you know, that's another manifestation of a rupture in the natural order of things, even if it's we perceive it as politics, but it is our community. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, and maybe even the Redo Festival?
Okay. So I got involved with a project called Reassembling Democracy, funded by Norwegian Research Council, led by a colleague in Norway, but it's big international collaboration. And my part of it, provoked by this Norwegian colleague, was to go to this festival in Arctic Norway, in Sapmi, the Arctic, the Norwegian-controlled part of Sami land, Sapmi. And I went for several years. So there's this festival called Ridu, and that's probably not the proper pronunciation. It's two different words that look very similar, which means a small storm by the coast. It's a great little festival. It brings together Indigenous performers from around the world to perform in the Arctic summer, so the sun never gets near setting. And so there's a kind of week-long festival, arts, and there's a big main stage with lots of bands, some local, some big name people like Buffy Sainte-Marie, and Tribe Called Red. I'm sort of picking the North American ones. I hope you might know them. But Maori bands, African bands, Yatkar, which is a great Siberian rock band that play this incredible horsehair, long-necked instrument called a yatkars, which you can find if you Google them too. They do cover versions of Bob Marley, but with this Siberian throat singing, which is incredible sound. So this festival is like, in this valley near a fiord, and there's a river that flows around it. It's organized by Sami people. It's part of the Sami cultural and political reassertion of sovereignty. So it does have a political, cultural side to it. So again, young people. So the Sami there's a break in their cultural tradition because they were banned from doing ceremony. Their shamans, in interpretation, were persecuted for hundreds of years by the various different kinds of largely Christian authorities in the Sami territories across the Arctic. But in the last 40, 50 years, there's been this cultural and political revival. Most of these words can be contested, so I realise, revival is not really the right word, but there are any other words difficult too. So there's an insistence on a democratic voice that Sami of the different communities need to be heard when local issues, or for them national issues, are happening, like quarrying and so on, reindeer herding in the southern Sami, fish stocks and so on in the north. So the festival's involved in all of that. But what interests me, obviously, I'm more interested in the thing that looks to me like religion, which isn't a very good Indigenous word often. So the rituals and the how people do sort of ceremony, and the bit of democracy which says the mountain has a voice. So when one of the Maori bands introduced themselves and their set on the main stage at Riddu, they start with a traditional Maori greeting in translation, which begins something like, from our mountain to your mountain, from our river to your river, from my people to your people, and so on. So you begin to identify your place by the mountain, the river, but not as just scenery, not as geography, but as members of your community, very powerful members of your community. And that showing respect from one mountain on one side of the world to the mountains in the Arctic was received very well by the Sami, and the same for the river, particularly because of global warming, the river that flows around the festival site is often in danger of flooding the festival because the ice is melting on the mountains faster than it should in the summer, and therefore the water flow in the river is fiercer and colder than it should be. And so I was just talking to this Sami guy just in a quiet moment during the festival. We were just chatting, and I thought he was talking about the river might flood the site, and he said, "Oh no, and what worries me is that the salmon and the trout are in the field, and they need to come upriver to spawn, to breed, and they can't do because the flow of water and the temperature of the water is too cold. They can't get in the stream, and if they don't, very soon, not only will they not breed, but salmon won't return to this river ever again." So this whole human change in global climate is affecting this larger than human community. And he wasn't worried about, well, his main obsession wasn't that they wouldn't be able to catch salmon and eat because they're coastal Sami, they live by fishing. But that the salmon community and the river community would be devastated. So that kind of showing respect for the larger world is, there's no line here between religion, environment, culture, climate science, and all those other things. They're all involved, and we need the stories and the rituals to get us out there doing things. We don't just need the depressing stories of disaster. We need the positive eagle flights and healthy relationships, and we need fun rituals in which strange things happen. That the love of our places. So this is me on the pagan front, not the entirely scholarly front, but that's fine by
good.
me.
Thank you. You were there on July 22nd, which I think most Americans don't know by that name. And I just found that very touching. It sounds like a little bit of a big subject shift. I wonder if you just say a little bit about that.
So, sorry, I'm really bad at numbers. So July 22nd in the year 20 something was the year when, sorry, this is going to catch my voice.
Would you like me to?
No, it's just,
Okay.
it's just emotion gets to my throat at this point. So there's July 22nd is you mentioned any Norwegian, they'll know where they were. I know where I was. I was at Riddu when we heard the news that there'd been a terrorist attack in Oslo, and Norway has a very small population, and everybody knows somebody who was affected. So in the center of Oslo, this crazy neo-Nazi drove a big van under a government building and detonated it, killing lots of people, doing lots of damage. And then when everybody was trying to save other people and work out what was going on, he then, disguised as a policeman, drove to an island where there was a left-wing and environmentalist youth movement gathering on the island of Utoya. Where he basically spent several hours murdering people, picking them off. There was at the beginning, there was a machine gun attack, and then people scattered and hid, and he hunted them down. And people didn't really know exactly what was going on. So this island in this fiord, there were people coming over in boats, and they were telling people that they would go and rescue people nearer to the coast, but that's where Breivik was shooting people. So it actually got worse rather than rescuing the people who'd swum out into the cold water. So what happened at Riddu at the festival, so there's all these indigenous performers from around the world and all these Norwegians, including Sami. So the festival organizer's daughter, Sami daughter, was either, I don't know now whether she was in Utoya, the island, or whether she was in Oslo, but she was wounded in one of the attacks. And most of the Norwegians and most of the local people left, and the rest of us were kind of stranded. This is a 2-3 hour bus journey from any airport, small regional airport. So what happened is that the indigenous performers got together and they put on a one night, it's the Arctic, there's no night, one evening performance. So they all did a little bit of their set, and it was incredible. I mean, it was really intense, really ritualized. They obviously picked the thing to honor life, and to resist the kind of assault, because nobody knew at that point who it was that had done this thing. So whether it was, Islamic terrorists or whatever, and then we began to get the news that it was this white supremacist attacking multiculturalism in a completely crazed way. So the final set of that performance, there was this guy who's the band Yatkar that I mentioned, the Siberian guy. They did this amazing performance, and then he did this kind of talk as if he sounded a bit like the Dalai Lama. All right, so the Dalai Lama has a great sense of humor, but this guy, having said this stuff, this is amazing. You're all treating this very calmly. You're not getting hysterical. You're not trying to go and shoot all the local Muslims. And this is great. This is the right way to kind of celebrate life and resist this positively. And he said, but this crazy guy down there, fuck him. I was like, oh, whoa. So it's like hearing the Dalai Lama suddenly, these expletives, which was a very cathartic moment for many of us, but deeply shocking. And that kind of bringing those two worlds of, well, multiple worlds, the one world of this white supremacist guy and his support, and then these other worlds of indigenous people, animistic communities, the larger threatened climate change world, and so on. All of that clashing in that moment was a big thing, and I don't know that that I've really kind of. I mean, I've talked a little bit like this with other people about it, but I don't know that I can say any more than that, because we all know where we were at certain dreadful moments, and the question is then how do you find the resources, and then I come back to indigenous people. So I don't know if you know the Potawatomi scholar Kyle White, who's another great environmental scholar. So he talks about that his people have already been through climate change. So they have resilience. And this doesn't make it okay. This doesn't make it good even. It doesn't mean that they're in a healthy place and they can sit back. It just means, they can dig into their resources for themselves first, and then maybe help others. But he says, they were shipped. They were like the Cherokee, marched out of their forests. So the Potawatomi were marched out of the wet forest lands of the Canadian border, the Great Lakes area, south to Oklahoma, no surprise, where they knew none of the plants or the animals, or very few. It was an arid zone, and the only way that the survivors carried on surviving was by finding elements of their tradition which would help them to relearn the larger human community. And I think we're all in that position. We're all in a world where we have to learn to adapt our mourning rituals, our Thanksgiving rituals, our sorry rituals, and all those other things, our greeting rituals for this new context. So that's definitely a significant part of what I see happening among Indigenous activists and others like the pipeline communities and so on. Sorry, I probably
Thank you.
yeah.
That was fine, and I
Okay.
appreciate your addressing that difficult subject. As you can imagine, it's also painful for a lot of us in North
Sure.
America. And,
yeah.
We have a lot of those moments, and I appreciate your continuing to connect us back to the other than beyond human world
Right.
that we're all part of. We've got just a few more minutes, and you had said something about the possibility of our Cherry Hill students being able to assist you or participate in some way in research. Yeah. Was that just off the cuff, or do you have something
I'd be happy.
tell us?
No, it'd be good. Okay, so not right away, not the next few months, but I am going to make a big shift in what I want to do research. I'm not flying ever again. I've said that a few times, and this time I'm going to stick to it. So I want to do a research project that brings a lot of people into the thing. So it's going to be a big online kind of survey. So in the autumn, fall, and through the winter, I'm going to prepare a kind of online survey thing that's going to begin with a little picture that some of you will have seen these words on church buildings, perhaps. Some of you may be familiar with it from different biblical and religious communities, Jewish or Christian. So there's a phrase in the Bible that says, prepare to meet your God. Yeah. So I saw this sign on a wall near a church many years ago, and I'm afraid I took it rather badly. I kind of thought it was a rather rude thing to say, because it meant I just assumed, perhaps wrongly, that it was a kind of, prepare to meet our God, and it'll be a bad day for you because you're a pagan, a witch, or gay, or you voted the wrong way or something, and God is going to be bad, right? Then I saw it again a couple of years later, and I spontaneously, maybe I was more pagan these 2 years later, certainly more relaxed. I saw this sign and I thought, spontaneously, this came to me, that what if everybody happened to be on a train going by this place, right? I'll take you there. So on this train, you can see this sign up on the bank on this church, big sign, prepare to meet your God. And it just came to me, what if everybody in this train was on their way to meet their God, their goddess, their favorite tree, their ancestors, even if it's their great grandmother, some significant being who make sense of their life or whatever it is. They're on their way. How have they prepared? What have they done? Because in religious studies, we write a lot about the rituals that people do when they meet their gods, goddesses, ancestors, whatever. And we write about those kind of, how do you do ceremony? But we only just, we don't write so much about the practicalities. So, so the day before, do you put certain clothes in your bag, or are you going to get ready to undress? Do you put body paints? Do you take a nice bottle of wine? What do you do physically? How do you get your kids ready to go to ceremony? How do you teach other people what's likely to happen when they turn up at this bizarre witchy event? You know, what to expect, you know, without ruining the whole, you know, without giving secrets away, without telling them everything. So what I want to do is just ask people, what do they, if this, what does this phrase mean to you? What would it mean if you wrote it, if it was your phrase? Adapt it as you will, prepared to meet your badger, goddess, cat. I see there's a cat on screen. My cat's just wandered by, curiously,
There are
perfect
always
timing.
cats at
So yeah,
charity gatherings.
but timing, that's just, no, she's not going to come and say hello. And then there's going to be some other questions, which I'm not going to give you now because I don't want to prompt people until they've done those first couple of bits. So when I've got this thing ready, I would be very grateful if you all would respond, because I want all kinds of religious and non-religious people, spiritual people, whatever you want to call yourselves, whatever other people do. I want your relatives to respond. And then I want the big problem of deciding how to make use of all this stuff, because I don't want to do like, here's a chapter with all the Christian responses, here's all the pagans and so on. I want to find out, you know, what do, you know, maybe this is just one possibility. There's a bit about clothes, there's a bit about food. You know, we all cook cakes, or we all cook something. We don't have sex for 3 days before, or we do have sex, or, you know, whatever. All kinds of things that you do or don't do before these events, in which you expect, you hope to meet these other beings, whoever they are. Yeah. So hopefully that's a kind of teaser for
Wonderful.
for
Sounds like
something
you're
to be
going to
done.
need some people to help do qualitative analysis, maybe.
Yeah, I may need a lot of help. People going through, if the stuff snowballs and the stuff comes in, I may need people to do all kinds of things. So,
Okay, very good.
So,
Well, Graham,
okay.
I do feel like I need to start wrapping us up, although I feel like everybody else is like me and probably been on the edge of their chair, enjoying your talk. A couple of things are that our next Coming to the Center will be October 22nd. It's also a Saturday. Caroline Tully will be joining us from Australia. So we have come up with a time that will work for her, and it will be 7 o'clock Eastern US time. And hope you'll go ahead and put that on your calendars. We'll probably go back to this 3 o'clock Eastern US time in the future, but Australia is literally the other side of the world from us. So we had to come up with something that would work for the most people. And I also wanted to ask if Jeffrey Kiefer, our board chair, is there anything you would like to say before we close down for the day?
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Harvey, for coming and speaking with us on this important topic. Important for many of us here at the seminary, but also important because many of the things that you talked about with the rise of animism and the increasing appreciation of that is just so needed right now in the world, really across spiritual and religious traditions. So this is just wonderful and very timely. So I think that we really appreciate this.
Thank you. I'm honored. Honored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, and let me just say again, we so appreciate your time and the work that you've done and are doing, and
Thanks.
for not being afraid to speak about this from a non-objective point of view.
Yes, yes, one day I'll learn how to do that. Sorry, I wasn't watching the chat, and I did a quick flick through just now. I just realised somebody did just say, "Will there be time for questions?" And there probably were questions further back. I'm very happy if people want to email me. It might take me a while to respond, given that I've got a couple of big deadlines that are, well, actually they were a couple of weeks ago, but need to be met very quickly. So if I don't reply immediately, I will do. So
Thank you.
so if there's specific questions or stuff, I'd be very happy to answer. But
Let's put your email address in the chat box.
Yeah.
If you will.
Shall I do that? Let me find, hang on. I'll just reopen the chat thing. Here we are. Sorry, I'm going to try I can never type my own name. I don't know if everybody else has that trouble. And I just, third time, retype it. Here we go. So it's quite easy. If I'd misspelled it, let's have a look. Right. So graham.harvey@open.ac.uk. Okay, that's my university email address.
So, well, we appreciate it.
And I'm very happy to be called Graham, right? We've been introduced, so the titles are useful when phoning the police, but they respond much more quickly when you say doctor, less impressed by professor. But it's a lesson some of you might want to pick up as well.
I have been corrected before about UK professors that there's a preference for professor over doctor, so I'll be sure and use doctor for you.
Well, I am a professor, so yes, in the UK, professor is what I think you would call a full professor. It's a hierarchy thing. So I have achieved that exalted rank. So yeah, my official title is professor, but I just say police don't understand that. But equally, on airlines, when somebody says, "Is there a doctor on the plane?" it's a bit bad when everyone's on their way to a conference and everyone goes, "I am a doctor, but not that kind." So, sorry.
That's good. Okay, great. Well, everybody, thank you for attending. If you don't know Cherry Hill, go visit us at cherryhillseminary.org and look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody.